I think it's time I come out and say it. Professor Utonium is my least favorite character in the entire reboot series. Yes, more than Princess. Yes, more than Donnie. Yes, even more than you-know-who. And I'll tell you why. These two are completely new characters conceived for this brand new reboot. They weren't in the original. Professor Utonium was, and he was one of the best written characters at that. Okay, let's be honest, most of the characters were well written back then, but that's besides the point. He taught the audience so many valuable things. Lessons about sticking up for yourself despite others putting you down for your gender. Lessons about overcoming your social embarrassment and using it to your advantage. Lessons about facing your fears head on. Professor Proofed essentially exists to say, fuck all that, and degrades him into the most insultingly flanderized character in the entire series. Let it be known that after watching this episode, I'm okay with Miss Bellum's removal, because the last thing I want to see is her character get the same treatment that the professor has. Sure, the reasoning behind it is still scummy, and I don't agree with that, but the fact that she isn't in the show is a blessing in disguise. Professor Utonium's incompetence in this show is through the roof. From being incapable of fixing a computer despite working with him all the time as a scientist, to his willingness to put the entire world in danger over a, and I still dislike this reasoning here, thirst for knowledge. And I get it, these things are meant to be played for laughs, but the jokes don't exactly work when they don't align with what his character is meant to be. Sure, there are hints of him being responsible parental guardian in episodes like The Stayover, Fashion Forward, and Bubbles of the Opera, but those moments are largely overshadowed by all of this incompetence. It clouds my perception of him as a whole, because every time he does something stupid, it just makes me dislike his character more and more. Professor Proofed was the breaking point for me. This was what ultimately made me decide that he is, indeed, my least favorite character in the show, and I won't lampshade this. Don't get me wrong, I'm not angry, I'm not upset, I'm just sad. Yeah, sad. It's honestly the best word I can use to describe here.
Now, if you'll just excuse me, I need to get another bandage. Oops, silly me. Jeez. Oops, silly stairs.
It's not just the professor who's intolerable here either. Just about every single character that appears in this episode makes this a chore to sit through. It got a little aggravating having to witness all of the blatant fallacies that make this episode fall apart. Just know that I consider this the worst appearance made by the professor this season, and I'll do my best to explain why as the review goes along. So this episode begins with the professor working on his latest creation in his lab, the Gigantinator Ray, a device designed to make anything it zaps grow to a much larger than normal version of itself. Everything seems to be going well until the girls decide to bust in spontaneously and nearly scare him into dropping the highly sensitive and likely radioactive rod acting as the power source of the ray. Yeah, that thing's as good as broken. The girls ask what he plans on using his newest invention for, and he responds with confirming that he plans on using it on his pancakes so that they can become bigger. And no, that's not an innuendo, get your mind out of the gutter. I'm talking genuine pancakes here.
Precisely.
The professor then begins to lower the rod onto the stand so that he can complete his ray once and for all. Meanwhile, Buttercup douses his pancakes in pepper because now is clearly the best time to do it, and she couldn't have waited an extra 15 seconds. A bit of the pepper floats on into the professor's nose, causing him to sneeze and ultimately drop the rod, which then explodes in his face and injures him greatly. Although it doesn't kill him because, well, we have to keep that PG rating. It's all downhill from here, and I wish that was an exaggeration. In the next scene, we see the girls talking with the professor about how he needs to be more careful around the house because he could have been seriously hurt.
Why are y'all clapping?
So the episode is essentially saying that despite the fact that Buttercup was clearly responsible for shaking that pepper everywhere which led to the professor's accident, it's his fault for not being more careful. That doesn't work. That's Buttercup scapegoating the professor into it being his fault despite the entire situation being out of his control. In fact, he deliberately tells the girls to let him concentrate.
Now please let me focus. This rod is highly unstable. The slightest miscalculation can be extremely dangerous.
Got science.
Hell, he even warned them that it was dangerous. And yet Buttercup follows through with her actions anyways when it's completely unjustified. This is unwarranted. It's not fair to the professor to be taking the blame for this, and yet the girls become some of the most intolerable jerks of the entire season to make sure that he suffers for their actions. It doesn't help that after the professor gets up to walk back down to the lab, he hits his head on the door and falls down the stairs, essentially serving as proof that the girls used to confirm their own fallacy and thus begin to take matters into their own hands. This inherently leads to the episode making use of a role reversal of sorts. The girls become the overprotective parental figure while the professor becomes the immature child who happens to be afraid of everything. It could be like an opposite Powerpuff in a sense, except that in that episode the girls were annoyed with the overprotection, whereas here the professor just goes along with it. The girls talk amongst themselves about what they should do given the fact that the professor isn't a superhero and thus can't take as much of a beating as them. Although given how many times the girls get taken down after barely even trying, I find it hard to believe that they can survive much of anything either.
Girls, the professor isn't a superhero like us. Yeah, if a four-headed monster threw a building at him, he could sprain his ankle. Or worse.
Next, we get a montage of the girls trying to protect the professor from even the most mundane of tasks. Drying his hair, watering the garden, heck, even crossing the street is deemed too dangerous for the professor to do on his own, so the girls have to step in and make sure he's safe. It's as if someone turned Blossom's neat freak dial over to overprotective mother, passed the trait on to Bubbles and Buttercup, and then rocketed the setting all the way up to 11. I mean, this is overkill and then some, and the worst part is that the professor just goes along with it the entire time. He doesn't stand up and tell the girls they're being ridiculous. He falls into the childish state of mind that's being restricted by the most preposterous of reasons, keeping him from functioning in everyday society.
Oh, thanks, girls. I had no idea the world could be so dangerous. This rod is highly unstable. The slightest miscalculation can be extremely dangerous.
I'm sorry, but I ain't buying it. The girls even go so far as to place him in this orange protective bubble that's meant to keep him safe from the dangers of the outside world.
Consider this house protected. Oh no!
Look, I get that the joke is they're overreacting to a pencil being threatening, but like, if the professor is in this protective bubble, where's the threat? Sure, if he was out in the open, it would probably work better because he's not technically safe from it and could theoretically get hurt. But if the ball can protect him from shark attacks, as Bubbles truly says here, then there's no reason for them to freak out. Well, after this little stunt, the girls admit to the professor that they got rid of everything dangerous in the house, even the stuff in the lab. So, essentially, the girls just went behind the professor's back, sold all of his personal belongings, which probably cost him a fortune, and then kept the money for themselves without giving him any share in the deal, and only told him about it after it was impossible for him to give them his consent. That's pretty sleazy, and it's not even a case where it's just one of the girls doing it either. All three of them, Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup, are all equally guilty here because all three of them are following through with this plan, and not at one moment do any of them question what they're doing. So yes, Buttercup had sold the professor's belongings to a guy she knew, including the plot-important Gigantonate array for a maximum price of what appears to be $200, and he drives into town, recklessly I might add, to wherever he can pawn off whatever the hell this thing is supposed to be. As luck would have it, the Gigantonate array of all things falls off the back of the truck, conveniently lands on the fire switch, and just so happens to zap a nearby baby carriage.
Oh yeah, she pays absolutely no attention to her kid.
Okay, so we're doing this now. We're ripping off the original again. I see how it is. What's the big idea, huh? Yes, as it seems, this now giant baby is roaming around the city chasing cars and destroying everything in its path without intent because it's a baby and it doesn't know any better. But back to the girls and the professor now. They're playing with walkie-talkies in what I can only presume to be a pretend game of keeping the professor safe when suddenly the hotline rings.
Yellow. Oh, hi, Mayor. Trouble downtown, you say? A giant baby, you say?
Bubbles is a Stinkenstein, you say?
Buttercup takes her sweet time talking to the mayor on the phone, even wasting more precious seconds to make fun of Bubbles for virtually no reason at all because she's just mean like that. That shows me that this baby isn't treated as a problem when it clearly is. But that's just me. Anyways, that tangent aside, Blossom puts on some relaxing TV for the professor to keep his state of mind from deteriorating any further than it already has. Oh wait.
Jam with a donut, jam with a donut, jam with a donut. Ooh, I love this show. Jam with a donut, jam with a donut.
Jam with a donut, jam with a donut, jam with a donut now.
Jam with a donut.
Jam with a donut, jam with a donut.
Jam with a
Jam with a donut.
I don't know what's worse, this or drink the antidote.
Drink the antidote, drink it up. Better from a plane than from a cup. Drink the antidote, drink it up. Better from a plane than from a cup.
We then find our girls in the city attempting to confront the giant baby that's causing chaos all over the place, but they're distracted by its utter cuteness,
Allowing the deceiver of worlds to claim its first victim.
Aw, we can't hurt him. He's too cutesy wootsy. You are a teeny tiny giant baby. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Bubbles!
truly a monster. Buttercup wants to take the foul beast out by force the way she typically does, but Blossom convinces her that they can't attack it because it's just a baby, ergo the episode is robbed from a potential monster battle because, well, let's face it, you shouldn't punch babies. Period.
You little fucker.
Yeah, maybe part of the reason why I don't enjoy this episode is because I'm not much of a baby person to begin with, but like, I can at least compliment the music for incorporating the songs Pop Goes the Weasel and Frere Jacques into the background. It's a minor detail, sure, but it's a suitable reference to the situation nonetheless.
Okay, what about biting? Pinching?
The answer is still no!
Back at the Powerpuff residence, Professor Utonium is awoken to the sound of the television announcing breaking news, in which it displays said baby from earlier walking around all adorable-like with the Powerpuff Girls captured. Never mind the fact that the girls should easily be able to get out of this like all of their other capture situations, so they're essentially allowing this baby to go around terrorizing everyone and destroying buildings along the way, but no one seems to care because it's just so adorable. This is a similar problem to what Sweet and Sour had from the original. Nobody wants to stop it because the thing that's doing the crime is cute, and that's enough of a reason for them to get away with it. Okay, sure, it's a baby and it's not technically aware of what it's doing, but that shouldn't stop the city folk from wanting the Powerpuff Girls to save them. Instead, they just act all calm and collected as if nothing's really wrong. Seeing these events unfold, the professor experiences conflict with his inner self in a game of back and forth about whether or not he can go save the girls from the giant baby in what is meant to be the character climax of the episode. It's one of those gags where he's talking to his reflection and each professor talking shares an opposite opinion as a way to reflect his inner struggle. I wish I could say that I was happy for him when he comes to this epiphany, but well, you already know how I feel. He runs into town in his giant hamster ball, which was actually played well enough to make an actual joke out of it in one shot, and he sees the baby with the girls in hand come straight for him. The baby sees the professor as a ball, and as any baby probably would, he wants to play with said ball, leading him to chase him left and right all over the city while the professor runs for his dear life.
Hurry, Gary! The scary robot movie's on!
This is the moment where the moral is essentially ham-fisted in for the sake of having one, because up until this point, I had no idea where this episode was going if it did have one, and the one we are given isn't represented the way that it's supposed to be. Essentially, the professor tells the girls that they have to live dangerously every once in a while, that they can't live life in a bubble. You have to go out and take risks. Too bad the only risk we see the professor take isn't even one that's succeeded yet, and if it weren't for the obvious fact that the heroes were going to win in the end because that's the status quo, he would have no idea if that moral was actually true. Unless you were to argue that he knew this before he became scared of everything at the beginning of the episode, but I'll again return to my previous argument that there's no reason for him to regress like this, given the fact that the girls were in the wrong and he's a scientist and had been living dangerously for years prior. This isn't a midlife crisis or anything, so why is he going through this now? The girls quickly turn around and let the professor go after hearing this without even so much as a second thought, and he runs towards the Gigantonate array, which somehow teleported from the local park to a random street corner. I would reference Honey, I Blew Up the Kid right now, but that movie has always disturbed the hell out of me, and I don't want to go searching for footage of it. The professor grabs the rod and places it inside the Gigantonate array, hits the baby, and shrinks it back down to its normal size, where it lands in its carriage miles away despite dropping straight downward. Events finally conclude with the professor making the girls his patent-pending pepper pancakes for breakfast. Sure enough, Buttercup buries her pancakes in pepper, which in turn causes the professor to sneeze and hurt himself, effectively leading her to call him out on getting hurt when it wasn't his fault once again. That was atrocious. I hate to be blunt, but it truly was a pain to sit through this episode. It really could have used some more professor-proof reading before given the go-ahead to be made. Between the professor's humiliating flanderization and the girl's intolerable treatment towards him, I can't say that there's a single character in this episode that I could like. Not even Bubbles, and she's the most innocent out of everyone here. I cannot recommend this episode at all. There's not much here that's of value to anyone, and yes, I'd put this towards the bottom tier of episodes. It's just not fun. Just take it from me and skip it. You're more likely to get laughs out of an episode of Fanboy and Chum Chum.